Hello and welcome. The time has come for Jodie Arias. I've been meaning to cover this trial for such a long time, and turns out I'm going to have a little bit more free time on my hands over the next week or so. So I'm in the mood for a Jodie Arias trial marathon. Who's with me? She's kind of like the equivalent of Elvis Presley or the Beatles when it comes to true crime, right? She's top tier. She's at least top three, right? I mean, which case would be more high profile? Which case has grabbed the public as much? I guess the Chris Watts case, Casey Anthony. Um, I mean, you could go back to the O.J. Simpson case, but we didn't really have the social media that we have now back then, right? Um, hey, thing one, how are you? OJ. Yeah, yeah. But it was kind of different with OJ because that was all sort of analyzed and commented on through um, mainstream media, right? Because we didn't have the kind of media that we have now, the kind of social media where we can all interact and digest and get wrapped around the axle on. So I would say kind of post 90s. For me, it'd be Jodie Arias number one, Chris Watts number two, and Casey Anthony number three. So what I'm intending to do, as I say, is a bit of a marathon on Jodie because, as I say, I always wanted to cover the trial, but because there's so much there to go through, it's quite you can get quite overawed by how much. But I thought it'd be cool just to go through um, some of the days one by one. Some of the most standout days, which would be really the cross examinations, and not only just of Jodie, but of the psychotherapist that the defence put on the stand, Alice Laviolette, because that is also fascinating. The dynamic between her and the prosecutor, Juan Martinez, because there's this really interesting and strange dynamic. The way that Alice reacts to Juan Martinez and tries to challenge him almost as much as Jodie attempted to. And from what I remember from watching this, there's an underlying kind of feminist, kind of liberal mindset going on with her. And she ended up doing the defense team no favors at all. So it'll be interesting to pick through some of those cross examinations. What I'll do, just to begin, is play this piece here, which is prior to the trial, and it includes the famous interview where Jodie says that no jury will convict me. Mark my words.
This beautiful young woman is about to go on trial for her life, accused of the savage, frenzied murder of her ex-boyfriend.
I know that I'm innocent. God knows I'm innocent. Travis knows I'm innocent.
She's talking about Travis Alexander, a popular motivational speaker she dated for 5 months. The steamy affair with Jodie Arias came to an end last year when she says she discovered he was cheating.
It wasn't very pretty. Breakups are never easy, but that sort of signified the end of our relationship.
Last June, Travis was brutally murdered. Travis Alexander was found dead in his shower here at his luxury home in Mesa, Arizona. He was shot in the face, stabbed 27 times, and his throat was slit from ear to ear. Police found a camera here at the crime scene. On it, provocative naked photographs of Jodie Arias and Travis Alexander, taken the day he was viciously murdered. Another photograph shows Travis seriously wounded and bleeding. Prosecutors say 28-year-old Jodie went to her former boyfriend's home for a final tryst, took the provocative photographs, then murdered him. They even have Jodie's palm print in his blood.
Did you kill Travis Alexander?
I absolutely did not kill Travis Alexander. I had nothing to do with his murder. I didn't harm him in any way.
I met Jodie Arias for a jailhouse interview, her hair now light brown, and she dropped a bombshell, describing for the first time what she said.
She definitely suits brunette as opposed to blonde.
As happened the day of the murder.
I witnessed Travis being attacked by 2 other individuals.
Who?
I don't know who they were. I couldn't pick them out in a police lineup.
So what happened?
They came into his home and attacked us both.
She says a man and a woman wearing masks burst into the home and attacked both of them. Jodie claims she fled, but was too terrified to call the police.
I'm not proud that I just left my friend there to be slaughtered at the hands of 2 other people. I'm not proud of that at all.
You understand.
She's got such a weird face to me. She looks like someone that's had plastic surgery and is went a bit wrong. Even though I know that she's not had plastic surgery, she has that look about her. And I disagree with the reporter at the start there. Is she beautiful? I don't see it. I really don't. Hey, Jackie, good to see you. How are you? What I will say, Jackie, I know that you viewed Jewels of Thought as well, and she was covering the Anthony Todd case recently, and up until I had seen that case, I would say that I've never seen anyone that exhibits as much narcissistic tendencies as Jodie Arias. She's like high scale, very high. But I have to readjust my assessment. It's this Anthony Todd guy. It's a whole other level. He makes Jodie look like Jordan Peterson. Ah, cool, Jackie. Yeah, I don't pick the best times to come on. I really don't. And I know Saturdays are not the best time to come on. People are busy, right? But I'm not this weekend. Yeah, cool. Watch the replay back, Jackie. Let's hear Jodie make her famous statement.
You look guilty here.
I understand that all of the evidence against me right now is very compelling.
What really happened in there?
In a nutshell, 2 people took Travis's life, 2 monsters.
You did not shoot Travis.
No, I've never even shot a real gun.
You did not stab him 27 times.
No, that's heinous.
Or
I've never.
slit his throat from ear to ear.
I can't imagine slitting anyone's throat.
Jodie Arias is sticking to her story that 2 mystery killers murdered her former boyfriend, and she's convinced a jury will believe her.
No jury is going to convict me.
Why not?
Because I'm innocent, and you can mark my words on that one. No jury will convict me.
I am very sorry for the enormous pain that I've caused the people that love.
No jury will convict me. Well, despite having the IQ of Albert Einstein, unfortunately for her, she failed. Okay, so let's get into the opening statements here. All right.
Mr. Martinez.
Good morning again. This is not a case of whodunit. The person who done it, the person who committed this killing, sits in court today. It's the defendant, Jodie Arias. And the person that she done it to is an individual by the name of Travis Victor Alexander, a former boyfriend of hers, an individual that she was in love with, an individual that was a good man, an individual that was one of the greatest blessings in her life. And this love, well, she rewarded that love for Travis Victor Alexander by sticking a knife in his chest. And you know, he was a good man, according to her. And with regard to being a good man, well, she slit his throat as a reward for being a good man. And in terms of these blessings, well, she knocked the blessings out of him by putting a bullet in his head during one event that occurred on June 4th of 2008. Travis Alexander had the misfortune of meeting up with the defendant in Las Vegas, Nevada at the MGM Grand back in September of 2006. They were both involved with a group called PPL, or Prepaid Legal. And basically what this organization did is they went out and they sold units, if you will. And basically it was a situation where people would buy these units and they would be covered for legal purposes should the need arise. And they met, as I said, in September of 2006. And after the meeting, it is true that Mr. Alexander began to have contact with the defendant. And he began sort of to pursue her. But it is also true, or an indication anyway, that initially he was mostly interested in converting her to the Mormon faith. You see, he was a Mormon. He had also been a Mormon for some time. And one of the few first things that he did when he began to talk to her initially is that he gave her the Book of Mormon. And a lot of the time that they had was spent on reading this Book of Mormon, talking about it. And so that their religious relationship progressed to a point, and it was a very rapid religious relationship, that it progressed to the point that in November, approximately 2 months later, in November of 2006, the defendant chose to become a Mormon. And the process that you undergo to do that is you become baptized. And so she was baptized in November of 2006. And the person that she chose to baptize her was none other than Travis Alexander.
It's amazing what people will do for love, isn't it? Or for infatuation. You know, they will join the Mormon faith.
The person that she had met up with, the person who had introduced her to this faith, and the person that she was beginning to get closer with. And so their relationship progressed after that point, and it became a much more personal relationship. Now they were both Mormons, and there are certain guidelines for Mormons that you'll hear about. Specifically, one of them is that there's not to be any sexual contact before marriage. That's considered a very large sin. I guess in the grand scheme of things, that's one of the sins that you need to avoid. But their relationship began to progress, and it was a very personal relationship. At that time, as the relationship progressed, the defendant was not living in the Arizona area. In fact, she lived in the Palm Springs area of California. And so it was sort of like a long distance relationship. They would call each other, they would send text messages, they would email each other. And so their relationship blossomed that way. And occasionally they would see each other. He would drive out there, or they would somehow meet. Well, by February of 2007, they became sort of an item.
Hello, 6 people. Don't be shy.
They agreed to just continue dating each other, just to see each other and not anybody else. And as part of that, one of the things that happened is that they both did what is not expected, but what usually can be expected to happen between two young people. they began to engage in sexual relations. And obviously that is against the Mormon faith. And it provided conflict for both of them, that here they
Yeah, unfortunately, Travis wasn't the most compliant of Mormons.
were sinning, if you will, all the time, whenever they would get together, and yet professing to be good Mormons on the other hand. But that's sort of how their relationship was at that point. Well, they continued this relationship for about 5 months, from February 2007 to about June of 2007. And in June, to be exact, using her telling, June 29th of 2007, the defendant couldn't help herself. She was a snoop, just couldn't help herself. And what she did is she went and got a hold of Mr. Alexander's phone, his cellular telephone. And she wanted to see what was in there. Couldn't stop herself from doing that. And so she goes and looks at his cell phone in June of 2007. And she's looking for things to see whether or not there's going to be any contact with any other women. She describes them as being flirtatious, and she wanted to know what was going on and wanted to see if there was anything in that cell phone that would confirm her suspicions about his flirtations. And she found things there that she didn't like. But it was her going into his cell phone.
I bet she
snooping.
did.
She did it surreptitiously. She did it without his knowledge because she wanted to know. Just couldn't help herself. And so she looks in there and finds things that she doesn't like. And at that point, they break up. That's June 29th of 2007. And remember, at that time, she's still living in Southern California in the Palm Spring area. After they broke up, you would expect that perhaps the emails would end. You would expect that perhaps the text messages would end, and maybe that the calls would attenuate. But just the opposite happens. Because instead of staying there in Southern California, or perhaps moving to where she was originally from, which is Wairika, California, which is on the Oregon-California border, instead of going there after this breakup in June of 2007, what does the defendant do? She moves to Mesa. She moves to Mesa so she can be closer to him. This individual that she does not trust, this individual whose phone she's gone and looked into, and this individual who she's just broken up, what does she do? Let's go to Mesa. Not only does she move to Mesa, but she moves to an area that's very close to his. And she is not in the same ward, but she does move to an area that's very close to where he is. And of course, the relationship continues. They continue.
So, of course, the big contention in this case is going to be whether or not Jodie was a victim of domestic abuse. And Jodie and the defense team are going to use every tactic possible. And it's obviously Martinez's responsibility to prove that that wasn't the case.
To talk. They continue to text message each other. They continue the emails. And oh yes, they continue the sexual liaisons because she moved here.
My opinion is that there was most definitely psychological abuse from Travis, unfortunately, but not the kind of abuse that the defense team are trying to suggest.
Well, this continues on for some time, but Mr. Alexander, by this point, appears to be ready to move on, or at least he appears to be ready to date other people. And in fact, he starts dating somebody by the name of Lisa Andrews. And there may have been others that he started to date. But at that point, there was no relationship between him and the defendant.
If you're going through a bad breakup, anyone, don't go and check their phone or check their social media. It's only going to drive you nuts.
Defendant, other than this constant contact and this sexual relationship between the two. This relationship that was facilitated, this sexual relationship that was facilitated by her move to the Mesa area. Well, this continues for some time until April of 2008. So in June of 2007, she moves here.
You agree, thing one, yeah? See, that's the thing. It's never black and white. It's not the victim is always an angel and the perpetrator is the devil. It's always, or usually, it's a bit of a grey area, right? And it's just true that Alexander, Travis Alexander, really did drive her crazy. But she obviously already possessed the messed up mental faculty to be able to do what she did, right? Both those things can still be true.
And we fast forward to April of 2008, when finally the relationship seems to have run its course. It seems to have run its course because the defendant has finally decided to move to where her hometown is, a small town by the name of Wairika, California. And again, it's about 1,000 miles away from Mesa. And what she does before she leaves is she spends about a week with Mr. Alexander. And yes, according to her, they do have sexual intercourse. They continue that course of conduct. And she rents a U-Haul. And there's an agreement between the two of them involving Mr. Alexander's automobile, a BMW. And basically, he gives it to her, but not really giving, in the sense that she has to pay him. And she has to pay him an undetermined amount of money per month for this BMW that is his. He actually then buys a Prius, a black Prius. And so in early April of
Something to mention as well, I can't remember the name of the male defense attorney, but the way he slouched there, that's his body language all the way through this trial. You know, it's unbelievable how relaxed he is. You know, he just gives the absolutely wrong image. He's so unprofessional. You know, he's not exactly instilling confidence within the jury that are looking at this guy. You know.
2008, she loads up that U-Haul. Her mother may have come out here, but not before that. And then straps the BMW behind it. Doesn't get very far before there's a problem. The BMW starts leaking oil and all these kinds of things because she left it in first gear and cannot be towed. So now the BMW is destroyed and it goes to some sort of shop. But she leaves, but she's still basically going to pay for that BMW because she's the individual that was in control of it. But that's still sort of up in the air about that. Well, you would have thought that once she moved to Wairika, which is approximately 1,000 miles away, you would have thought that their relationship would have been over. No, it wasn't over. They continued to talk. They continued to send text messages, emails, instant messaging, and oh yes, there's the phone sex that she records of them when they are engaged in that particular conduct. And it's the phone sex that she keeps. Well, 2 short months after that April of 2008, when she moved to Wairika, in June 9th of 2008, the police get a 911 call. The Mesa Police Department receives a 911 call. And the person calling on the other line is an individual by the name of Marie Hall. And Marie Hall is an individual that Mr. Alexander has taken an interest in. She is somebody that is very much in the faith. She's somebody that is in his singles ward, so that they go and they sit around and they socialize and they talk about the Mormon doctrine. And so she's somebody that he feels much affinity to, and he starts to court her. And again, this is when the defendant is already in Wairika. He begins to look at her, and the relationship with Lisa Andrews is now over. And so he begins to take her out. There's a total of 3 dates that they go on. But for her, there's really no spark there. She's not interested in the slightest in him. not only is she not interested in the slightest in him, she lets him know about it. It's not like she's going to sit there and just continue to go out with him and hang out and that sort of thing. No, they go out one time, they go back to a bookstore and they drink hot chocolate. There's no contact at all. There's not even sometimes what is considered the obligatory goodnight kiss. There's none of that. And she lets him know, I'm just not interested in you. And in fact, she starts to date somebody else. After she breaks up with that person, Mr. Alexander feels that perhaps there's a chance with him. And so they go out one more time and they go.
One of the things I often wondered about with this trial, and it has been a long time since I watched any of this, so, you know, I'm a little bit out of the loop with this case in terms of certain information, but I'm looking forward just to revisit it fresh, anew. But one thing I remember thinking about this was whether Jodie was so capable of disassociating herself with what she had done, whether or not she actually genuinely convinced herself that she was being domestically abused and that she was pushed to a certain point where she had to lash out, just as a way for her to actually, like a coping mechanism, you know, just in order to enable her to be convincing on the stand and to get through the days with the knowledge of what she has done. Because I think it's pretty clear later on in this trial that there is regret and grief there within her. But I just wonder, you know, on a day-to-day basis, if she really did manage to convince herself of something that wasn't actually true, just to try and justify it somehow in her head. Because I think there's certain people that are capable of doing that. I mean, there's people out there that can trick a lie detector test, okay, because they're able to convince themselves completely, and the lie detector can't pick it up.
To a
Thing one, everyone needs to remember Fatal Attraction. There's a lesson to be learned by watching that movie. Yeah, that's the that movie is responsible for a lot of cliches and memes.
a crafts kind of thing where they put a pot together, that's the kind of thing, or they go rock climbing. That's the extent of their dating relationship. He's interested, she is not, but there's never any physical contact. Mr. Alexander has is a free trip to Cancun. This organization, this prepaid legal that he's involved in, has given him, along with other people with the PPL, a trip to Cancun. And he's allowed to take somebody with him. And so he approaches this Marie or Mimi Hall about going with him to Cancun. She says, no, I really don't want to go because I don't want you to believe that there's something going on between us. I really don't want to go there. But he tells her that that's not how it is. They're going to go as friends. In fact, they're even going to be in different bedrooms. So it's a situation where she's been to Cancun before. She wants to go. It was fun. So she doesn't see any harm in going. And so the trip that they're supposed to go on is supposed to start on the 10th of June. And so she's the one that's on the phone on June 9th. And she hasn't spoken to Mr. Alexander for about a week, since June 2nd, which is a Monday. And it's strange to her because the trip is impending, and he usually would call her every day or send text messages or maybe email her. So it was strange that he hadn't called her, but she really didn't think anything of it. You know, since they were only going to go as friends, what's the big deal, right? And so when she doesn't hear from him up until the night, before they're to go, which is the 9th, which is a Tuesday, well, a Monday, one of the things she does is she goes over on that Monday night. And when she goes over there, she goes and knocks on the door. And she knocks on the door very, very hard. Well, nobody answers. The only thing that she sees is the dog. The dog Napoleon, which is Mr. Alexander's dog, comes up to the door, just sort of throwing himself up on the door very excitedly. And she can tell that there's something wrong here. But nobody answers the door, and she doesn't know how to get in. Now there's 4 of them. There's Mimi Hall, her girlfriend, and these 2 other individuals, 2 men. They open the door, and when they open the door, Marie Hall stays behind, and the 2 men go inside. But she's able to see through the crack all this blood that's in the hallway. And the 2 individuals come out running excitedly and saying, "There's blood here, and that's Travis. He's in the shower. He's dead." And that's the reason that Marie Hall was on the telephone that evening of June 9th, 2008, calling the police to let them know that the person that she was going to go to Cancun with the next day, this friend of hers from the church, Travis Alexander, was dead. Well, of course, the police responded. And one of the things that they were able to note, and I do have a diagram so that maybe you can follow closer what I'm saying. I told you that, and this is exhibit number 249. I told you that Marie Hall and her friends went to this door, and this is the door. As you can see there, looking there, that's a big red spot. And there was lots of blood that you could also see here. And of course, the body is found on the lower right-hand corner in the shower. It wasn't standing, it wasn't anything, it was all just sort of hunched in. And one of the things that struck the investigators when they first went in there and they started looking at this is that the scene had been staged. It had been manipulated. Whoever had been the killer of this scene had manipulated that scene. And the police knew that that scene had been manipulated, first of all, by where the body was found. The body was found inside the shower, and the killing had obviously taken place somewhere else because there was blood all around the bottom here, the southern part. Right there on the sink, it is clear that the victim had stood over that and bled. And in fact, down here, it was also clear that he had bled there, and there were some drag marks down that hallway. So somebody had taken the time to manipulate, stage, change the appearance of the scene by placing the body there. The other thing that was notable about the staging of the scene was that whoever had done this killing had also taken the time to wash the body down. And it appeared that the person who had done this actually washed the body down with this big cup, had taken it and poured it all over the body so that basically there was almost no blood on the body. It was just bloated from decomposition, but the area here, the cut that they were subsequently going to see, there was no real blood anywhere. So it was clear that somebody had cleaned him up such that whatever evidence was there is not going to be there anymore because the body had been washed. The other thing that they noted was that if this body is in such a bad condition, there was no knife there. It appears there were cuts, and it appears there was a shot, and the gun wasn't there either. So somebody had also removed those from the scene, had taken the time, had thought this out enough to say, I'm going to take the gun and I'm going to take the knife away. Additionally, what this person had done was that they had taken, possibly, and it's consistent with the glass, had taken the glass and had just poured water down the hallway, down this area, because boxes that were on the ground level in this closet area here were actually soaked in water and blood. And additionally, what they were able to see was that down here, this big, large mass of blood with the 45 on there, well, that also had a lot of water in it. That was diluted blood. Somebody had taken the time to actually try to clean that.
It's all starting to come back to me a little bit because I remember, I think Martinez's theory was that she stabbed him first and then shot Travis. I think it was the other way around, that she shot him first, and then when he was more incapacitated, that's when she started stabbing him, I think. Just she had to incapacitate him with a gun, and then she was able to take her rage out, more physically with her knife.
Not only that, the items have been moved. For example, there was a scale, and the scale underneath it had drops of blood that somebody had, somehow the blood had gotten there, the scale had been turned over. The mat, the same thing, there was blood underneath. So somebody had taken a considerable amount of time, however much time.
And if there's anyone in here watching, if you can just let me know if the audio's okay, if you can hear myself and you can hear the video. If you just put a 1 if it's fine, put a 2 if there's any issue.
That would be to stage that part of the scene. But they weren't through with that part of the staging of the scene. Because what they ended up doing is they took, and there was a matching set of towels there. What they did is they took one of the towels and began to wipe the area there. We don't know exactly what area was wiped down, but the towel is red and has this reddish substance to it. Not only did they wipe it down with that towel, but they took all of the bedding from this king-size bed, and they took that along with this towel and walked it downstairs to that washer as you walk in, and stuck it in there. And what was also notable for the police in terms of what was staged and what was manipulated was that here in this closet and in this bedroom where the bed was, that had not been manipulated. In other words, there was no blood there, but the covers had been taken, anything that was on there had been taken and placed into that washing machine. There were also some of the victim's clothing that was in that washing machine. And also, interestingly enough, in that washing machine downstairs was a camera. And this camera, unfortunately, had been put through the wash. And as everybody that's familiar with the washing, that's not a very gentle sort of process. And the camera was destroyed. It was all messed up. It would never take any pictures again. So that's one of the things that confronted, or that the police were able to see. The other thing that they were able to find came from the body, things that they needed to know. And one of the things that they noted from that was that this was a very violent attack that took some time. The reason that it was a very violent attack is that there were 3 ways that he was killed. It wasn't just one shot, it was more than that. And what the medical examiner was able to find was, his name's Kevin Horn, was that there was a stab to the heart area that was not immediately or rapidly fatal. And what that means is he's stabbed and he still lives. He still can walk. He can still stand. He can still grab. He can still speak. That's not immediately fatal, and it's not rapidly fatal. The other thing that the medical examiner found, but it would kill him, this stab to the heart. The other thing that the medical examiner found was that his throat was slit from ear to ear. And that one was rapidly fatal, which means it would have killed him very quickly because of the blood loss. Not only would it have killed him very quickly, but he would not have gained or had consciousness for a very long period of time. He would have almost immediately have lapsed into unconsciousness. So the one to the throat. Well, and the one to the head, well, again, since that involved the brain, and although the body was decomposed, according to the medical examiner, that one was also rapidly fatal. And additionally, he would lose consciousness immediately. Based on that, and based on the fact that Mr. Alexander in his hands had what the medical examiner is going to term as defensive wounds. In other words, Mr. Alexander did not die calmly. He fought. Whoever this person was that had killed him, he had fought, which meant that he was conscious at the time. So what that meant is that with regard to the injuries that were inflicted, according to the medical examiner, The first injury was the one to the heart. And when that was inflicted, Mr. Alexander at some point began to fight. And what he was able to do was grab the knife, but he grabbed the blade of the knife so that he has cuts in his hand as he's fighting, presumably for his life. They're called defensive wounds. And given that there was blood over the sink that we have over here, and that the sink is waist level, and that blood is coming down from a source, Mr. Alexander was able to get up from where he was standing at this point, go over to the sink, stand there and bleed. But those aren't the only wounds that he had. He had a grouping of wounds back here behind his neck, on his shoulders. He had some on his head. He had some on his ears. He had some here too. And by here, I mean his front torso area. So the first hit, if you will, was to the heart area. And he was walking around. He was grabbing the knife. He was trying to defend himself. And that's why they call them defensive wounds. Given the blood spatter pattern, he ended up over here where the 45 was. And when he ended up there, that's when his throat was slit. And he was still alive, and we know that because of the amount of blood that was there. So whoever had done it basically followed him around, gone to where that 45 is, went to finish him off and cut his throat. But they weren't through with him. What they did is, this individual then, killer, dragged him.
And just to say, Jodie might be a psycho, right? But those tears are real. She does deeply regret what happened, I think.
This one, towards the area of the sink. And in that area of the sink, where that number 1 is, right in that general area, and according to the medical examiner, by that time, he was probably most likely dead. Finished the job as if it needed to be finished, because the first one, even though it wasn't rapidly fatal, was going to be fatal. The second one for sure was totally fatal. The third one, well, took a shot, stuck it in his temple, and the body was at that point more likely than not dead. So Mr. Alexander probably didn't feel that one. And you'll see is that there's a number 1 here. One of the things that was there was a 25 caliber casing, which means that the gun that was used was a 25 caliber. Even though police were not able to recover the gun.
The gun that she stole of her grandparents, I think it was.
They know that it was a 25 caliber handgun. So that's what they have in this particular area. But you can have all of that. You now know that it was Mr. Alexander. You now know how he died. But you really don't know the time. You haven't narrowed that down. And quite frankly, you don't know the identity, one of the most important things, of the person who may have done this. And so police were kind of left there to guess. And you can lift all of the fingerprints you want in the world, but if you don't have anybody to compare that to, you're not going to know who the person was. And you can get all of the blood and DNA samples that you want, saliva, any biological substance that you want, but if you don't have it to compare to a known sample, that really doesn't get you any nearer to solving this crime, to find out who the person was that had actually killed this individual. Well, the police then went downstairs and they found this camera. And as I told you, this camera was destroyed. But one of the things that they were able to do is they were able to take out a very small item. It's a SIM card, which is really the brain of the camera. And this camera had been recently purchased by Mr. Alexander. He had bought it between April of 2008 and his killing, because according to the defendant, she actually advised him via the phone while he was making this purchase of this camera so that he would get a really good camera. Well, this really good camera was in the washer.
Did you see the look that Jodie gave there when she glanced over? She despises Juan Martinez with a passion.
It was destroyed. It wasn't going to take any pictures anymore. So the police really seemed to have nothing except the SIM card. And the SIM card has gotten wet. It has gone through the cycle. And so what ends up
Peely, is there nothing we can keep private?
You can just put it down. What ends up happening is that they get this SIM card. And with this SIM card, they are able to find, and you're going to hear the term encase. They're able to put it through this process so that even though not only has it been damaged, but in this camera, somebody has gone through and erased everything. So that not only is the camera damaged physically, but the person who had it last, whoever that may be, has erased everything. But the police are able to recover, using this encase program, 3 sets of photographs. And the first set of photographs is in the early afternoon. And it's a group of 6 photographs. And these photographs are dated June 4th, 2008. And they have times on them. And they have time to the second. And what they're able to see that on June 4th, at 1:42 and 53 seconds, Mr. Alexander was very much alive. Not only was he very much alive, he was involved in these photographs with a woman. And yes, they were both sinning because they were going at it. They were nude. And yes, they are engaged in sexual relations in these photographs. Photograph is at 1:42:53 p.m. The police are.
I should say that cheesy dramatic music is not mine. That's embedded within the original video.
Able to go in there and get that photograph. And this shows a frontal view of a woman. Then there's another photograph at 1:44 p.m. and it shows this woman's back end. And they're nude. They're just taking photographs. At 1:44:50 p.m., there's a photograph of the victim, and clearly he's excited. But there's also...
Jodie was infatuated with Travis Alexander, and unfortunately, she was just Travis's piece on the side. You know, I think that's what drove her just bananas.
on there.
Thing is, he encouraged it though. I don't think he was as honest with her as he should have been, you know.
A bottle of KY, which is a personal lubricant that's used during sex. And we know that it was the defendant who introduced Mr. Alexander to the use of this KY. Well, the other thing is that we also, at 1:47:15, there's another view of the defendant. And then there are 2 other photographs that you really can't tell the time, but certainly they are of the defendant. So there's a total of 4 photographs of the defendant and 2 of Mr. Alexander. And they're both of them are very much alive. And yes, these are salacious photographs in the sense that what they are doing is what happens behind closed doors. But there is no legal prohibition against her driving or coming over to his house and having sex. There's no prohibition about that. There's no prohibition against Mr. Alexander having sex either. But that's what they find. They find him with a woman having sex on June 4th of 2008. Very much alive, both of them sinning, if you will. Well, that still doesn't get you any nearer to solving this crime because at least you know that he was alive on June 4th. And as they look at those photographs, they're able to make a determination, are able to see that actually the person in that photograph is somebody that people know. And it's an individual by the name of Jodie Arias. But you know, photographs can be a little blurry, they can be a little deceptive. You kind of want to be sure that that's the person. And so what they do is on this hallway, and you'll see it as number 77, they were able to find a palm print, left palm print. And that is a mixture, it's a DNA mixture, but it's a palm print. And they're able to compare it to the known photograph of Jodie Arias and she's left-handed, and that's her palm print that's on them. So now they have a photograph of what they believe is her, plus they have this palm print, and they've developed a DNA profile from there that matches her DNA profile. Then also in the hallway here at number 6, down here toward the bottom, where there's the RP and the 6, they find a hair, and they conduct DNA analysis on that hair. And the profile that is developed pursuant to that DNA analysis matches the profile of the defendant. So the police are now sure that the person in those photographs is the defendant, and it's June 4th of 2008. Again, it's nice to know that, and that they're getting close, and it appears, because of all the blood that's there, that she's the person that committed this horrible crime, that committed this horrible killing. This second set of photographs is 20 photographs, and they are all of Mr. Alexander. And presumably because she's the one that's in the photograph with him, and they're not out of photographs, in other words, he's not taking them himself, it appears that she's the one that's taking up these photographs of him in the shower, and they're on June 4th, 2008 at 5:22:24. They were engaged in these acts at 1:45, but now at 5:22:24, he's in the shower and he's posing for the person who's taking these photographs. And there's many poses of the water running down him, and most of them are from the waist up. So there's no genitalia that is being shown during these photographs. But the 20th photograph shows him sitting in this shower. And you do see the lower right quadrant of his posterior. And that photograph was taken at 5:30. So he was in the shower for approximately 8 minutes with these photographs being taken. Well, that again starts to narrow it down. And then there's finally a third set of photographs. And these are accidental photographs. These are inadvertent photographs. These are photographs that the killer did not want taken. And the first one of those is 44 seconds, taken 44 seconds after the photograph of Mr. Alexander's posterior in the shower. And that's taken at 5:31:14. I'm sorry, yes, that is taken at 5:31:14. So it's 44 seconds after the last photograph in the shower. And this is, if you will, a photograph of movement. And the reason that I say it's a photograph of movement is because it's taken, or it's consistent with being taken from the waist. The camera is straight up. In other words, it's not upside down, it's not to the side, it's straight up. But the photograph is a picture of the lights above the shower, and it's nothing more than movement. But that's when the attack is happening, and that's when Mr. Alexander is being attacked by this individual. The next inadvertent photograph is at 5:32:16, 1 minute and 2 seconds later. And that photograph is taken right here, near that 45. And it's another inadvertent photograph. And this photograph is consistent with the camera being taken off from the shoulder, the lanyard that's around it, and falling. But the camera is actually on the ground now and upside down. So this photograph is upside down. All the other photographs have been right side up, which is consistent with the camera falling here, striking the click, or striking.
What is a little unique as well about this trial is that Juan Martinez was both the initial investigator and the prosecutor in court. So he was very, very invested in this. Unsurprisingly, he brought a book out after this trial, right? And I remember reading it, and he put so much personal effort into this. You know, he kind of went above and beyond just his professionalism. He really wanted to nail Jodie, and he did.
The button and taking a photograph. And you do see the killer in this one. You see, this individual's here. You see her foot. Not only you see her foot, but you see Mr. Alexander's head. You see his arm. You see him bleeding profusely. You see the area of the sink down here. And you know what else you see? You see her manipulating him, trying to drag him or move him. And we know she moved him because he ends up in the shower. So we do know that he's here for sure. Well, she begins to tug, pull him towards the shower. And there's another photograph that's inadvertently taken a minute and 16 seconds later at 5:33:32. And this photograph, again, is upside down when it's found. So the camera had not been moved, apparently, from the previous photograph. And this one is consistent with somebody stepping on the camera and there being a photo that it's taken. And on this one, what you do see is the shoulder of Mr. Alexander. You see the trim, and it's a little bit further down this hallway. It's this person that's in court here today. Drags him down in this direction. So the police now know what happened. They know that on June 4th of 2008, starting around in the afternoon, sometime after 1 o'clock, the defendant is there with Mr. Alexander. Even though they've broken up, even though she's in Wairika, somehow she's there in his house in Mesa, Arizona. They know that they engage in what is clearly one of the normal things of our species, and that's sexual intercourse. They enjoy themselves. Yes, from a religious perspective, both of them were sinning. But she's there, and she's there from Wairika. She took 1,000 miles to get to that sinning. Then we know that at 5:30-ish, later on, he's in the shower. They know that whatever's going on, his defenses are down, he's very comfortable. We also know then that as he sat there, she took the knife and began to stab him when he was in that defenseless sitting position and began and stuck the knife in his chest. He struggled. He grabbed the knife. And when he grabbed the knife, of course that resulted in more blood. But since he's not going to die immediately, he's going to die from the loss of blood, and he hasn't lost consciousness, he began to go around the bathroom and ends up at the sink, hunched over. We know that he receives a lot of stab wounds to the back, and they're grouped, and also to his head. We know that he was stationary at that point when he gets to that sink. So we don't know exactly where, but it could be, it's consistent with him then being stabbed at that point as he continues to bleed out. And this bleeding out process is not immediate. He can speak, he can talk, blood may be flowing from his mouth, but he can still make noises, he can still move until he starts to lose strength. We know that, we can say at least, that it's consistent with him then trying to get away. And he got as far as here, the entrance to the major part of the bedroom. And we know that because of the photographs that we have. And we also know because of the big blotch of blood that's there. And that's where the slitting ear to ear took place. He was still alive at that point. That's why there's so much blood. Because when you die, the medical examiner will tell you, you can do whatever you want to the body. But if you're already dead, there's not going to be this spurting of blood. There's not going to be this blood that's out there. So he was still alive then. We also know that that is a rapidly mortal wound. And in light of the fact that he was already bleeding, he was more likely than not dead at that point. And by the time she was dragging him down, pulling him down towards this area right here, he didn't need that shot to the head. But she had a gun somewhere.
She shot him first, Juan.
She got that gun. We don't know the distance. And part of the reason we don't know the distance is because the body's decomposed. But do know that she put that bullet right in his temple. And that also would have been rapidly fatal, that injury would have also rendered him unconscious. So after that, she took that camera at some point, knowing what was on there. And you know how difficult it is to deal with these cameras. She was able to go through the process and deleted all of the photographs. She took time to drag him, put him in the shower, clean him up, doing away with whatever evidence may be on there, clean the area there, even though it's still very bloody, took a towel to clean up, walked downstairs. Remember, he's got this dog Napoleon there. Walked downstairs, went to the washing machine, stuck everything in the washing machine, and had the wherewithal to start it. And put the camera in there after she deleted all of those photographs. Police knew that that's who she was. But they had something else that they needed to deal with. Because as I told you, this happened on June 4th, which was a Wednesday. The body wasn't discovered until Monday, the 9th of June. On the 10th of June, which is when, since everything happened at night, the investigation really took off on the 10th. Detective Steve Flores of the Mesa Police Department received a telephone call from somebody wanting to help. This person here called him up, wanted to help him out, and started to talk about how their relationship with Travis Alexander, how she was in Yreka, California at this time this happened, could not have had anything to do with this at all. She was asked, well, you know, does Mr. Alexander have any guns? Oh, no. Mr. Alexander has no guns whatsoever. All he could do for him to defend himself, all he had was his fist. How about knives? Did he have any knives? Oh, no knives. Oh, not Mr. Alexander. He didn't have any of that. Not Travis. So she's telling them he didn't have a gun there. So that the killers, whoever they were, according to her, brought them with them. The other thing that she says is that, well, you may want to start looking. She gives them a lead. You may want to start looking at one of his roommates, a guy by the last name of Brown, Thomas Brown. That's who you really need to look at, because, you know, if you're really looking for people, that's the person who you may want to look at, because I wasn't there. According to her, the last time she was there was in April of 2008. So how could it be her, since this happened on June 4th, 2008? So it really couldn't have been her. Well, at that time, of course, the police know. They've seen photographs. They already know they got fingerprints there. So they know that perhaps isn't the truth. Well, they know it isn't the truth. It's not a perhaps proposition. This detective keeps talking to her. And she says, you know, it really wasn't me. I didn't have anything to do with it, and describes this relationship that she had with Mr. Alexander. The police need to do something with that, because she has made it a point of saying she wasn't there. I couldn't have possibly been there. And so they start looking further at a possibility of where she was and that sort of thing. And one of the things that they're able to discover is that a week before this killing on June 4th of 2008, on May 28, 2008, there was a burglary report, seemingly unrelated to this case. There was a burglary report up in Yreka, California, where she was, May 28, 2008. And the burglary police responded sometime around 3:30 in the afternoon of May 28th, which was about a week before Mr. Alexander was killed. And they responded to a house on Pine Street, the house where the defendant was living back on May 28th of 2008. And police did talk to the defendant about it, and there were items that were taken during this burglary. But according to the officer that responded, Kevin Friedman of the Yreka Police Department, well, you know, something not right about this burglary. I mean, maybe the entry, there was a little bit of a problem. It was just like they were very careful how they entered. They opened the drawers, but, you know, there were items that clearly were of value that they didn't take. And, well, it just didn't seem quite right. When he went there were two people there, the grandparents, but the defendant wasn't there. She was called and showed up and indicated that she had been the last person there and had been there as late as approximately 1 p.m. And the burglary was reported sometime around 3:30. So it happened between 1 and 3:30 p.m. And the defendant reported, oh, yes, there was some items that were taken of mine. There was a $20 bill and a $10 bill, so there was $30 that were taken of mine. And, you know, luckily for me, before I left, I was able to hide my laptop underneath some dirty clothing. So just in case somebody came in and, you know, wanted to steal stuff, they didn't take my laptop. And thank God I did that, because they didn't take my laptop. Well, those were some of the things that were taken and some of the things that were taken. But one of the things that was taken was a .25 caliber handgun belonging to the grandfather. And this is just a week before the killing. And it matched in the sense that it's the same caliber, the .25 caliber casing that is labeled number 1 and is found by the sink. Well, the police looked at that and knew that there was a time, it was very close in time. The other thing that police were able to find was that on that same day, May 28th of 2008, at 9:25 p.m., the defendant sent an email. And she sent an email to Travis Alexander. And she mentions that he's going to Cancun. That's the first mention there is in any of their correspondence, whether it be text messaging, whether it be emails or instant messaging, of Cancun. He indicates that she knows that he's going to Cancun.
It's amazing how much planning she did for this. She thought of everything. She just made that one mistake by leaving the memory card there. Absolute nuts, you know.
It's clear now that he's going to Cancun and she ain't going with him. So that's something that they have. The other thing that they start looking around and they're able to find is that the defendant on June 2nd, which is 2 days before the killing, actually went from Wairika, California to Redding, California, which is maybe 1 to 2 hours away, south. And she went south for the purpose of renting a car. They have car rental agencies in Wairika, but she actually went to a different town that's approximately 90 miles away. And she went to a budget rent-a-car, and she spoke to the agent there. And one of the things that she was able to do is rent a car. But again, it was not in her town, and it was in a place that's far away. And the person who rented the car to her, well, he was shown a photographic lineup. And he said, and asked whether or not he saw the person that he rented the car to. He said, oh yeah, there she is right there, the defendant. He said, but you know, the photograph that you're showing me, she's got black hair. When she came to rent the car from me, she was a blonde. So, you know, it's the same girl, I'm sure of that. But her hair color changed. Her hair color changed from June 2nd to June 4th in the afternoon when she was having sex with Mr. Alexander. So we know that from the photographs. And she rented the car and said she was going to return it on June 6th of 2008. And in fact, she returned it on June 7th of 2008. And there was over 2,000 miles on that car. One of the other things that police were able to do is that they were able to find receipts. And they were able to show that the defendant, in fact, and she readily admits this now, that she did take a trip. She took a trip, but she was going to go to Utah, according to her. She was going to go to Utah because she has a love interest there, or somebody that could potentially be a love interest, by the name of Ryan Burns. And she was going to visit him, not only visit him, but she was also going there to maybe do some marketing with PPL on this Thursday afternoon, which would have been the 5th of June. And so they're able to see that she goes to Southern California, stops at places like Starbucks there in the evening, sometime around 9 o'clock in the evening, and giving her plenty of time to be there the next day. So they're able to see that not only does she have the opportunity, she actually is placed near the area of California, which would have been a short is a relative term, drive to Mesa. So when she said to the police back on June 10th of 2008 that she hadn't been there, well, the police knew now that was not true because they could trace her movements. Well, the other thing that they were able to find that came out is that...
Martinez, we're going to take the news at this time. All right, ladies and gentlemen, please be back in the designated area at 1:30. Please remember the admonition. I'm going to ask that you review the admonition. It is in your black binder. You should have it in writing.
We left off before lunch talking about the police investigation into the defendant's statement that she was not at Mr. Alexander's home on June 4th of 2008. And specifically, we were talking about the police obtaining documents that showed that she rented a car in Redding, California on June 2nd, and that they were able to show that she actually made her way down south in California and made her way down to Southern California, and at some point made her way over to Utah. And ostensibly, she indicated that she was going to Utah to meet up with a friend, somebody that she had a romantic interest in, somebody by the name of Brian Burns. And what Mr. Burns will tell you is that she was supposed to arrive a day earlier, and somehow, for this whole period of time, couldn't get a hold of her. Tried to call her, she wouldn't call him back. We know now that the reason that was is because she was with Mr. Alexander. But she did happen to arrive in the Salt Lake City, Utah area on June 5th, June 5th, which was that Thursday. And as she got there, sometime around a little bit before 11 o'clock, Mr. Burns indicated that he had to go to a meeting, and that if she wanted to go with him, that she could follow him in her car, the rental car that she was driving. As they were driving in West Jordan, Utah, an officer with the West Jordan Police Department stopped her in that vehicle. And the reason they stopped her in that car was because there was a problem with her license plate. There are 2 plates that are required in Utah, and in fact, there are 2 plates that are provided and required in California. So when the car was rented, there was a front plate and there was also a back plate. Well, the car that she was driving did not have a front plate. So between the time that she rented it and the time that she was stopped, somebody took that plate off. Additionally, the reason that she was stopped is that the plate in the back had been turned upside down. And so the police officer stopped the car, and he will come in. His name's Michael Gaglietti, and he will tell you that the person that was driving the car was the defendant. And she provided some story about being at Starbucks, and that somehow some of the kids were trying to play a trick and took the license plate off the car and put one of the license plates inside the car, and then somehow turned the other license plate upside down. Well, she continues on with Mr. Burns, and then at some point the meeting is over. They go back to his place, and what seems to be something with her is that the inevitable happens. They do begin to become engaged amorously. They begin to kiss. They begin to get involved in that sort of fashion. And Mr. Burns will tell you that, yes, they did go further than that. And in fact, he will say that he had his hands between her legs. And he will also say that the reason that they didn't go all the way or continue on to sexual intercourse is because he's Mormon. And his teachings, which I've been telling you about, do not allow for that sort of behavior, if you will. And so it wasn't that the defendant was stopping him, it was that he decided not to go any further than that. And then the police also determined that the car was finally returned on the 7th of June back to the budget rent-a-car in Redding, California. Well, the police, now knowing that there was this trip that was planned, they have the photograph, they now have the DNA, and they also have the fingerprints, arrested the defendant for the first-degree murder of Travis Alexander. And as part of that process of the arrest, the police conducted or spoke with the defendant. And of course, prior to speaking with the defendant, they admonished her of the Miranda warnings. They talked to her about what the Miranda warnings were, and she agreed to speak with them. And these are videotaped. And this was on June 15th of 2008. And they arrested her while she was in this home on Pine Street, the home that she lived there with her grandparents, the home where there was this burglary on May 28th of 2008. And when they spoke with her on that June 15th, the defendant said, well, I'll talk to you about it, but I don't, other than what I've already told you, I don't know too much about it. Well, why don't you tell us what you do know? Well, I can tell you that the last time that I was there was back in April of 2008. That's what she told me. And they said, well, are you sure? I mean, we have some photographs of you there. She said, well, are you sure they weren't taken on a different date? No, we're sure they weren't taken on a different date. Well, I wasn't there. It wasn't me. Well, what about this time lapse? What about this gap where you sort of disappear? You're supposed to be in Utah with this other boyfriend of yours, and yet you can't be found. People are making calls. There are no calls going out, nothing going in. What about that time? I got lost. What ended up happening is that I ended up getting lost, and I got so lost I almost can't tell you where I was. But I do know one thing, she said. I ended up on the 40, the I-40. And the detective said to her, how can that be possible? If you're coming from California and you're going to Salt Lake City, Utah, how is it possible, since the road goes northeast, the 15 goes northeast and takes you through Las Vegas that way? Why? The only way that you can get on the 40 is if you come through Mesa and then you come up that way. Couldn't have been on the 40. There's no way that you could have. Oh, yes, I was, she said. I can get lost with the best of them. I slept in my car, and my phone, the reason no one was able to get a hold of me was that it wasn't charged up. It has lost its charge. The police kept saying, but that doesn't make any sense. Why would you say that that's what happened? And if you're going to Salt Lake City, how can you say that you actually came through the 40 and then up through Las Vegas that way? She kept to her story and said, no, I was never there on June 4th, 2008. So the police left it at that. The next day, she indicated a willingness to continue talking to the police officers, and that was July 16th. And she was again read her Miranda warnings. And this time, when she spoke to the police officer, she said,
Yeah, Jodie was one of these suspects that decides to just keep in touch with law enforcement, just keeps calling them up and she's obviously trying to check out what they know. They just can't help themselves. They just can't resist being in contact, because they're so desperate to appear innocent, I guess, and tell them what they think they need to hear. It's really strange.
I got to tell you something. I really have to tell you something. Maybe what I told you yesterday, well, maybe.
A desire to be in control, and a paranoia about just how much danger they're in. They just need to know.
Maybe that's not the truth. What I really have to tell you today is what happened. And what ended up happening is, and I'm just incredibly scared for my family. I'm just totally scared for my brother, my sister, my family, my grandparents, because as a result of this killing, well, the people that really did this killing, they're the ones. These are the people that are out to get my parents. So, although I told you yesterday that I wasn't there, well, I'm telling you now that I was there. And I can tell you what happened. I arrived there sometime around 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning of June 4th. When I arrived there, Travis was on the computer, and he was watching some sort of YouTube thing about some ladies with something on their head. It was just a silly video, and we sat and watched it for a little bit. And after watching that for a short period of time, well, we went up to bed. Nothing happened. The next day, in the afternoon, you're right. That is me in those photographs. That's me, and yes, we are engaged. Intimacies. We're having sex. The other thing that's also true is that, well,
Yeah, she changed her story numerous times prior to trial.
those photographs, 20 that I talked to you about, I was the one that was the photographer. I was the one that was taking those photographs. I was the one that talked him into standing and posing for me. He really didn't want to pose for me. He thought it was just not his cup of tea, but you know, he sort of did it for me. And so I began to take the photographs of him. As I'm taking these photographs of him, I hear this loud noise. And something hits me. And I really can't, I don't know if, I think I went unconscious. Not sure I went unconscious, but I think I did. And then I realized that Travis is hurt. I don't know how it happened, but I realized that Travis is hurt. And he's on all fours. And he's saying, help me, or words to that effect. He can't get up. And I'm trying to help him. I'm trying to do the best I can to get him out of there, to get him up so we can leave. That's what I'm doing. She says, I'm trying to do the best that I can. But he can't seem to get up because there's a problem with his legs. He says he can't move. Well, while I'm trying to do this, I realized that, and again, I didn't tell you yesterday because I was afraid. But what is going on is that there's these two individuals. First, she really doesn't know what their sexes are, but comes around and says, it's a man and it's a woman. Not only is it a man and a woman, but all I can see are their eyes. I can tell you, I guess, she said that they're Caucasian. Maybe she can tell you that. But other than that, I don't have any way of identifying who these attackers are. And according to them, it appears.
Yeah, the male defense lawyer is Kirk Nurmi. Just his posture. I can't believe that the other lawyer, you know, didn't say something to him, or Jodie didn't. I'm pretty sure I remember that there was quite a few problems between Jodie and Kirk Nurmi. I wouldn't be surprised. It turns out he got disbarred through a tell-all book that he came out with a few years later. It's as if he's acting as if this is a mock trial, you know, just a pretend trial.
That I surprised them, that I shouldn't have been there, because one of them said words to the effect that, you know, that's that girl from California. I wasn't supposed to be there, that these people were designed to take care of Travis for whatever reason they had. And I don't know what that reason is. They were there to do him harm. Well, what kind of weapons did they have? Well, she said, I think they had one or two guns. I'm really not sure. All I know is that I was focused on Travis. I had been hit myself. I didn't know what to do. And so what happened then? Well, Travis kept saying to go to the neighbors for help, but I didn't want to leave him there. And at one point, what I did was that I was able to, and it depends on what point the story is picked up, but I pushed the girl who was there, and I was able to get the better of her, and I was about to run out, get out and go get some help, except that I was then confronted by the guy. And the girl kept saying, well, just do her. The guy didn't want to do it. But I had the gun straight at my face. And this gun that was pointed at my face, well, he pulled the trigger. And for whatever reason, Providence perhaps, gun didn't go off. But I was very worried still about Travis, and I needed to get him out of there. When the gun didn't go off, well, this guy started looking through my purse. And lo and behold, in my purse, believe it or not, I happen to have my car registration that shows my address, because that's what I carry around. So they knew, they being this guy, knew exactly where I live. And he said to me, well, if you tell what happened here, the same thing's going to happen to your family. So she then told the detective, how could you expect me to say anything? At some point, she also indicates that she is fighting with the woman. She claims that she's barefoot and that the woman may have hit her feet, but she was able to hit the woman also. The detective asked, well, what about a knife? Did a knife ever come up? She said, I think the woman was the one that had the knife. And when you were going through all these things, and she says everything happened in the bathroom, when you were going through all these things, what was Travis doing? What was going on with Travis? Well, he was alive. It looks like he was really in a lot of pain. But there wasn't anything I could do because he couldn't get up. I tried. I did the best that I could. I fought with a girl. I had the gun pointed at me. I mean, they already knew where I lived. Just by looking at it, they knew my address, and they, I guess, had committed to memory. So I was worried about my family. So there was nothing I could do. So what happened next? Well, I was able to pick up my purse, and the police did not find any articles of clothing there from her. I was able, she said, to pick up my purse, run out of the house, run downstairs, and nobody chased me. And then I was able to get in the car, and I was able to drive away and make my getaway. Why didn't you call the police? She was asked. Well, don't you know? My phone wasn't charged up. That's why I couldn't dial. That's what the problem was. Never called the police from there all the way to Utah. There never was a call. The only call came from Murray Hall on June 9th. That's her version. And after that version, the defendant seemed to want an audience. And she began to go on national television to talk about it. And basically, that was her story, that there had been two other individuals that had done it. And in fact, she went on a show called Inside Edition, which will be exhibit number 247, and she talked to them about this.
I understand that everything, all of the evidence against me right now is very compelling.
What really happened in there?
In a nutshell, two people took Travis's life, two monsters.
You did not shoot Travis.
No, I've never even shot a real gun.
You did not stab him 27
Never,
times.
that's heinous.
Or
I've never.
slit his throat from ear to ear.
I can't imagine slitting anyone's throat.
That was her story, in part, that's a summary of the story that she told the detective. Well, there's a different story now. Now, it's not that she wasn't there. Now, it's not that it's two people with whatever variation she may have provided to these national shows. Now, she admits it. It was her. She's the person who actually did this. And she's the person that actually did, even though she says otherwise, she's the one that did the stabbing, she's the one that slit his throat, and she's the one that shot him. She's the one that now is admitting that after telling all these things. And even though she says that, she still has a view as to the evidence. This is exhibit number 248.
No jury is going to convict me
Why not?
because I'm innocent, and you can mark my words on that one. No jury will convict me.
I also ask that you mark her words, that no jury will convict her, even though she has admitted that she's the person that did this after giving many or different stories of what happened. And as you mark her words, I ask you, while you're doing that, in your final deliberations, that you remember that while you're marking the guilty verdict for her premeditated killing of Travis Alexander. Thank you.
Okay, so that's the opening argument from Juan. I don't think there's any point in listening to the opening argument from the defense team. I'm just going to bring up the first day of the cross-examination. I think that's the next. Hold on. Let me set that up. Bear with me. Okay. All right, so this is the first part. There's 3 parts here of the actual cross-examination. So she's already gone up on the stand and she's come up with her defense story, which is that she did indeed kill him, but it was due to self-defense, and that she was in fear of her life because of the domestic abuse theory. And this is the first time that Juan Martinez is going to get a chance to cross-examine her. And you will notice that she starts off very self-assured, very confident. I think she really did genuinely believe that she would be able to handle Juan, and she just slowly got chipped away at, I think, and he broke her down. So let's start off with this and just notice her composure and her confidence at the beginning here.
Please be seated. The record will show the presence of the jury, the defendant, and all counsel. Ms. Arias, you are still under oath. Do you understand?
Yes.
Mr. Martinez, you may cross-examine.
Take a look at Exhibit 413. You recognize that exhibit, correct?
Yes.
And that's a picture of you, correct? Right
Yes.
here. And the other one is a picture of your dumb sister, Angela, correct?
That's my sister. She's not dumb.
Well, do you remember having a conversation with Travis Alexander back on May 10th of 2008?
Yes.
And do you remember that you tape recorded that conversation?
Yes.
And during that conversation, isn't it true that you said, but I honestly think, talking about Angela, she's a little bit dumb. You said that, right?
Yes, I called her dumb and stupid.
Did I ask you whether or not you called her stupid, ma'am?
No.
I asked you whether or not you called her dumb, right? Now
Yes.
take a look at Exhibit 452. Do you recognize the 2 people there? And that was taken on May 10th, we'll bring it in, of 2008, right? And this
Yes.
photograph here, exhibit number 413, features the color of your hair, doesn't it?
Yes.
Exhibit 452 also features the color of your hair, doesn't it?
Yes, a different part of my hair.
And this was taken sometime in May of 2008, correct?
This exhibit,
No, exhibit number 452.
I only remember it was the spring, I think.
Of 2008?
Yes.
Now take a look at the back of exhibit 452. It contains a date on there. Does that date refresh your recollection as to when this photograph was taken?
Yes.
And what date was this photograph taken?
5 days later, the 15th of May, 2008.
And with regard to this photograph, it also features you, and it also features your sister, the one that you also said was stupid, correct? Now, with regard to this name calling, one of the things that we heard through a text message was that you were upset at some point because Mr. Alexander said that you were going to turn out like your mother, or you were acting like your mother. Do you remember that text message, man?
Yes.
And in that text message, there was this indication that somehow he was saying something bad about your mother, right?
Yes,
And when you testified, you seemed to get pretty upset about that, right?
I remember getting emotional.
And you indicated that you loved your mother, right?
I do love my mother, yes.
Did you or did you not indicate that you loved your mother? I'm not asking you if you love your mother. I'm asking you if you indicated it.
I don't remember.
Do you have problems with your memory, man?
Sometimes.
So you can tell us, for example, what kind of coffee you bought at Starbucks back on June 3rd of 2008, but you can't tell us what you.
I think part of Juan's strategy here, and it would be interesting to see some other prosecutions that he's done just to make a comparison. But I suspect that his strategy here is to be quite aggressive with Jodie, and pick her up on every little point because he understands that Jodie does not like to be demeaned in any way. You know, she has a lot of pride and she thinks a lot of herself. So if he can, try and make her look silly or not quite together, that's really going to get her riled up. And I think it does eventually work.
Said yesterday or the day before?
I always got the same drink at Starbucks.
Like she's doing well here at the moment. She's in complete control of herself. And it's just a matter of how long she can keep that up.
And you can tell us, for example, what type of sex you had with Mr. Alexander many years ago, but you're having trouble telling us what you said a couple of days ago?
When I'm under stress, yeah, it affects my memory.
I thought you said the relationship with Mr. Alexander was very stressful.
Has anyone ever noticed themselves losing their ability of memory because you're under stress? I would have thought it would have been the opposite way around. If you're more stressed over a situation, you're going to be more likely to remember that whatever was happening in that instance, right? Such a bizarre choice of words that she used there.
Some of the sex wasn't.
Pardon?
Some of the sex wasn't.
So you did enjoy the sex then, is that what you're telling me?
At times
You
I
did
did.
indicate at some point that as part of your examination also that Mr. Alexander at some point said something about your grandparents also. Do you remember telling us that?
My grandfather.
Right, that he made some pejorative comment or some bad comment about him, right?
Yes, his name.
Right. And one of the things that seems to be coming out here is that you seem to have a double standard here with regard to making comments about people, don't you?
Yes, I do. I do.
And in fact, it's okay for you to make comments about, for example, Angela and call her dumb and stupid, right?
No.
Well, but you said it, right?
And there's another thing. Has anyone ever seen any pictures of Jodie with glasses on outside of the actual trial? It's part of her costume. It's part of her presentation, of this poor little girl that was going through such hell, through all this domestic abuse. Here I am, frail little Jodie.
I did.
And we heard on the telephone conversation that you were laughing when you said that, right?
Yeah, it was sentimental, kind of.
You were laughing. You weren't upset when you said it, were you?
No.
And then when Mr. Alexander says something like, you're going to be like your mother, that's when you get emotional and upset, right?
I did.
And that's when you get upset when he says something about your grandfather, right?
That night I was upset.
And, well, you did get upset, yes or no?
No, because I was already upset.
Well, you didn't get upset on the witness stand when you told us about
Oh, yeah,
that?
on the witness stand, certainly.
And so it just seems that it's okay unless it's okay to say these things unless Mr. Alexander that's saying them, right? So
No,
you're
that's not
applying a
what I'm
different
saying.
standard to Mr. Alexander, correct?
No.
Yes or no?
No.
And ma'am, one of the other things that we know with regard to this standard applying and that sort of thing is back yesterday, as a matter of fact, you told us that back in August of 2007, you went over to Mr. Alexander's house. Do you remember telling us that?
Yes.
And you remember telling us that at that time you were broken up with Mr. Alexander, right?
Yes, I'd broken up with him.
Well, you broken up with him or he'd broken up with you? One of the two, correct?
I broke up with him about a month
And
before.
you broke up with him on June 29th of 2007, right?
Yes.
But you felt that it was okay for you to go over to his house in August of 2007, didn't you?
After he told me.
Yes or no? Did you feel it was okay to go over to his house?
I said yes.
And when you went over to his house, you indicated that you knocked or you did something and that nobody came to the door, right?
I went to his house a lot in August, so it depends on
Ma'am,
the
I'm
incident you're
talking
referring
about the
to.
incident that you told us about yesterday. Do you remember the one that you related that involved the killing? Do you remember telling us about that?
I did not knock.
And you did go over there, and at some point you started to peep in to the house, didn't you?
Yes.
So that means that you don't know if you knocked, though, right?
I did not knock. I know I did not.
So you went around the back then to look, right?
I went around the back to get in.
You went around the back then, right?
Yes.
And when you went around the back, you're telling us you went around the back to get in, right?
Yes.
But when you got to the back to get in, you started to look at what was going on, right?
I glanced in as I was walking to the sliding glass door.
You did walk in and you were looking at what was going on, right?
I did not walk in.
Then you were from outside looking in, right?
Yes.
Never went in, right?
No, I ran out of the backyard.
You never went in, yes or no?
I said no.
And when you went and looked, you saw something that upset you, right?
Yes.
You saw Mr. Alexander, right?
I didn't know it was him at
Yes
first, but
or
yes.
no? Did
that
you
was
see
him.
him
I
during
did,
that
I said no.
encounter? Pardon?
I didn't know it was him at first.
You didn't see him when you were there that night?
I did afterward, yes.
That night, ma'am, listen to my question. That night, did you see Mr. Alexander inside that house? Yes or no?
Yes.
And inside that house, there was a female, right?
Yes.
What's the name of the female?
He didn't tell me her name.
I'm asking that. Did I ask you if he told you the name?
No.
So, did you recognize her?
No, I did not.
And he was there with the female, though. You were able to see her face, though, right?
Yes, sort of.
Well, yes or sort of means two different things. Yes or no?
Her strategy is to be as precise as possible and as pedantic as possible, just to jolt Juan off his pace, and it kind of backfires because it becomes such an intimate joust between the two of them, and I think that helps to slowly break her down because she can never win that battle.
Were you able to see her face or not?
Part of it was shadowed from the
Yes or
TV
no, ma'am?
behind her, so I
Ma'am,
saw part of it.
Judge, she's not answering my question. If you can instruct her.
Ms. Arias, listen carefully to the question and answer only the question you are asked.
Okay.
May continue.
Could you see her face? Yes or no?
Part of it.
But you were able to see that they were making out, right?
Oh, yeah, they were.
And so is that a yes? They were making out, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Is that yes?
Yes.
And part of what you also saw was that her brassiere was off, right?
I did not see that. I just saw her rehook her bra.
Pardon?
I didn't see it all the way off. It just saw
You
her
indicated that you saw her hooking the brassiere back on, right? You
She
told
was
us that
rehooking
yesterday,
it.
yes?
She was rehooking it, yes.
So you did tell us that yesterday, right?
Yes.
So that means that at least that her bra was unhooked, right?
It was unhooked.
And you stood there and they stood up in reaction to something that you did? Is that what you're telling us?
No,
They didn't see you,
they didn't see me.
but you saw you. So what happened then is you actually were watching what they were doing then, right?
Briefly, yes.
Did I ask you for how long, ma'am?
No,
I asked you if you stood there and watched them, right?
no.
You didn't stand there and watch them?
I didn't stand there. I saw it and then I turned and ran out of the backyard.
But you saw enough to know that they were kissing, right?
Yes.
You used the term making out, didn't you, yesterday?
Yes.
You were there long enough to see that one of the individuals was Mr. Alexander, not his roommates, right?
Yes.
You were able to see that it was a female, right?
Yes.
You were able to see that the bra was unhooked, right?
Yes.
And the lights weren't on, right?
There was a light.
Well, didn't you indicate that it was like a TV kind of light?
That light. Yes.
Right? So there was no light, there was a television that was on, right?
That's light.
Ma'am, was it a light or was it a television that was on?
It was light from a television screen.
So are you saying that it was a television that was on then?
Yes.
And from that light, you were able to make all of this out, correct?
Yes.
No other light was on, right?
Not that I recall.
And then you decided to leave, right?
Yes.
And this was at the point that you were living very close to Mr. Alexander, right?
No.
Well, you were living within 10 miles of him, weren't you?
I was living by Greenfield and Broadway. I don't know the length.
How long would it take you to drive that?
About 15 minutes, depending on traffic.
And after you saw this, one of the things that you did was that you took off, right?
Yes,
And then you thought about it, right?
of course. Mhm.
And you felt strongly enough about this that the next day you called your father, right?
I called my parents' house and my
Yeah,
dad
yes or
answered.
no, you spoke to your father.
I did speak to him.
And you were crying, right?
Yes,
And you were upset about this, right?
yes,
And you told him why you were upset, right?
yes.
I thought you said before that you didn't discuss these issues involving you and Mr. Alexander.
Not typically.
Not typically. You said you didn't yesterday and all the days before. You remember telling us that?
The violence, yes.
Oh, I see. So, but you did discuss the fact that you saw him kissing with somebody else with your father, right?
Yes,
And as a result of that, you decided to go talk to Mr. Alexander about it, right?
yes.
What in the world gave you the right to go talk to an ex-boyfriend with who, according to you, you'd broken up with? What right do you have to do that?
Objection, Your Honor, sorry.
Sustained.
Ma'am, did you feel that you could go and talk to him about that?
Of course.
Why? Weren't you broken up?
Yes,
You were being territorial about him, weren't you?
no.
Oh, you weren't? Then why in the world would you even care what he was doing?
Because he was trying to court me back.
That's you telling us that he was trying to court you back. If he's trying to court you back, you could have just walked away at that point, couldn't you?
Yeah, I could have at any time, I guess.
Well, at that point, you could have walked away, right?
Yes,
You didn't need him for his paycheck, right? Because he wasn't giving you money, right?
he was giving me money.
Well, that was for some work, but you could have gotten other work, right?
I guess I could have looked.
You guess. You worked at other places. You know you could have gotten other work, couldn't you?
Not in August. It's very slow season for restaurants.
So you're saying that you were restricted in only getting work at restaurants, that there's no other kind of work that you could get?
Restaurants is,
Yes or no?
I guess that would be no, but I hadn't thought about it.
So then, in addition to that, you were living in your own place, right?
No,
Well, you were living with Mr. Alexander?
no,
You were living elsewhere, weren't you?
yes,
You were living in another place, right?
yes,
Where you were paying rent, right?
no,
You weren't paying any rent at all.
not with Rachel.
So in other words, it was even better for you. You didn't even have to worry about having to pay the rent then, right?
Yes,
And so
I don't know about anyone else, but it is hard not to sympathise with Jodie to some extent. I mean, Travis was playing games with her, I think. It just happened that she was the type of person that was capable of snapping in such a way. And it wasn't just a snap, obviously, because she premeditated this over days. She put so much thought into it. But even despite that fact, I still believe that if it wasn't for these unique circumstances between her and Travis, I don't think she would ever have been a danger to anyone. It's kind of like Chris Watts. I don't believe that Chris Watts would have ever harmed anyone if he didn't have such unique circumstances going on with himself.
you could have just left that situation alone, but you decided to confront him anyway, right?
of course.
And the reason that you did it is because you
Sometimes with a lot of these situations, these type of cases, which are one-offs, I feel sometimes that maybe all the stars just happen to align in the wrong way You know, it's like a perfect storm.
You were jealous, right?
No.
And then you did talk to him about this issue, correct?
Yes.
And he got upset with you, right?
No.
He didn't get upset and scream and run upstairs? Isn't that what you told us yesterday?
Yes, he did.
So, ma'am, to go back to this issue involving the text messages, one of the things that you told us was that there was a text message that you sent to somebody by the name of Steve Carroll, right?
Yes.
And that it was a two-part text message, right?
Yes.
In this two-part text message, one part ended up going to Mr. Alexander, right?
Yes.
And that he got upset about it, right?
Very yes.
And after he got upset about it, one of the things that he wanted was to see the second part of this text message, right?
Yes.
And so you lied to him at that point, right?
No.
Well, you fabricated a second text message, didn't you?
After that point, yes.
So are you telling me that fabricating a text message is not a lie?
No, I'm not saying that.
So you did lie to him, Mr. Alexander, right?
Yes and no.
So you think that sending him that text message and telling him this is the second part of the text message, that's not a lie even though you fabricated it?
That part was the lie.
And so you then were asked the question, well, how did that make you feel when Mr. Alexander was sending you these text messages involving Mr. Carroll? Do you remember that line of questioning? We're applying a different standard here, then, right?
Objection, argumentative.
With regard to this issue of how you feel, isn't that the same way that you felt when you were peeping in his window in August of 2007? Isn't that the same kind of feeling that you were having
The same as what?
as the one involving Steve Carroll?
I don't know.
You were mad at Mr. Alexander both times, weren't you?
I wasn't mad at Alexander.
You weren't mad at him, or you were upset with him then, right?
At what time?
Either time.
Steve Carroll, no. The girl from Phoenix, yes.
And so it just seems that it's okay for you to lie to him about a guy, but when it comes to him being with some other girl, you decide to confront him, right?
Yes.
And one of the other things that you told us yesterday was that you were monogamous with Mr. Alexander, right?
Sexually monogamous, yes.
Ma'am, you told us you were monogamous, and that's what monogamous means, sexually, doesn't it?
I think it means more than that sometimes.
Well, in this case, monogamous means sexually, doesn't it?
Objection, this characterizes your testimony.
Restate your question.
When you say monogamous, it means sexually, doesn't it?
Which time?
The time that we're talking about right now, involving Mr. Alexander, no other time.
Our relationship evolved, so.
I'm not asking you if it evolved. At the end, right when you killed him, you indicated that you were monogamous with him, right?
Yes.
And at that time, you then left the killing scene, if you will, and you went up to Utah, right?
Yes.
And when you went up to Utah, ma'am, you ended up with somebody by the name of Brian Burns, right?
Yes.
And you ended up in his bed, right?
I think it was a love sack.
Okay, and with regard to at that point, according to you, Mr. Alexander still wasn't dead, was he?
It wasn't discussed.
Well, did I ask you whether or not you discussed it with Mr. Burns? I didn't, did I?
I wasn't talking about Mr. Burns.
I'm asking you at that time, didn't you tell us yesterday, at the time that you went up to Utah, you weren't sure if he was dead? Do you remember telling us that?
Not in Utah, from the Hoover Dam, or right before the checkpoint.
So when did you know that he was dead? Tell me that.
Well, I got confirmation of it on June 10th, but
So, okay, if you got confirmation on June 10th, you met with Mr. Burns, what, before June 10th, didn't you?
yes,
You met him on the 5th, right?
yes,
And so at that point, you didn't know, according to your own story, that Mr. Alexander was dead, right?
I guess I knew. I wasn't accepting it.
You either knew or you didn't. Which one is it, ma'am? Make up your mind, please.
Objection, ask and answer.
Ask another question.
Did you know he was dead when you were Mr. Burns and he were kissing?
Objection, ask and answer. This is the same question.
Yeah, I think I did.
You think you did, but you're not sure at that point.
I wasn't really in my own mind. I was out of my mind, sort of.
So if you didn't think he was dead, that portion of you didn't think he was dead, then it's okay for you at that point, if you didn't think he was dead, to sort of roll around with Mr. Alexander then, with Mr. Burns. Then that was okay, right?
I'm single.
Right? Just like he was on August 7th of 2000, on August 8th of 2000, in August of 2007, right?
Yes,
So it's okay for you, then it should be okay for him, right?
it was okay
Then why did you confront him the next day if it was okay?
because he was still courting me. I wanted to know where I stood.
And so because he was still, your definition, courting you, you felt that you deserved an explanation, right?
Yes.
Hadn't you?
Is that a common phrase that's used over there? Courting? I've not heard that phrase, and other than in books. Courting. So magisterial. May I court you, miss?
Just had intercourse with Mr. Alexander on the 4th of June?
Yes.
And if he was still alive, he would have deserved an explanation then for you being with Mr. Burns, right?
No.
Well, no, aren't we? You're applying a different standard here, aren't you?
No.
You're saying, one, it's okay for you to confront him about the situation, but not okay for Mr. Alexander to confront you, right?
If he wanted to confront me, it would have been okay.
And with regard to the exhibit number 452, it does show you, right? Correct?
Yes.
And it shows again Angela, correct?
Yes.
Shows something else on there though, doesn't it? Doesn't it show your hand?
Yes.
And in fact, let me show you another close-up of that hand. Exhibit 453 is a close-up of your hand, right?
Yes.
And then you can also see the jewelry around your sister's neck.
Yes.
Exhibit 453, correct?
Yes.
And you previously have told us about exhibit 452 and when it was taken and who's in that photograph, correct?
Yes.
I move for the admission of exhibit 453.
No objection.
And now this was also taken according to your testimony on May 15th. Let's take a look at that, of 2008. That's a picture of your left hand, isn't it?
Yes.
And that shows your ring finger, right?
Yes.
Do you remember that you testified that on January 22nd of 2008, you and Mr. Alexander were involved in some sort of violent encounter? Do you remember telling us about that?
Yes.
And you told us that during that encounter, he threw you down. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And while you were down, that he kicked you, right?
Yes.
And when he kicked you, ma'am, one of the things that happened was that you put up your left hand. Do you remember telling us that?
Yes, both hands.
Well, you told us specifically about your left hand, right?
Yes.
And when you went to put up your left hand, according to you, he kicked you and he damaged your ring finger on the left hand, correct?
Yes.
And in fact, you even held it up for us, didn't you?
Yes.
And it was crooked when you showed it to us, wasn't it?
It's bent. Yes.
It's bent. Show us how bent it is again, ma'am. It's higher so we can see it sideways. Ma'am, if he caused that damage on January 22nd of 2008, that would have been before this picture that we have here, which is exhibit number 453. It would have been about 5 months before that, right?
It was before that.
5 months, right?
4.
4 months then, right?
Yes.
You don't have a bent finger here in exhibit 453, do you?
My finger is bent there.
You're saying that your finger is bent there.
Yes. Just
Hold
the
up your
same.
finger again. Sideways so we could also see it.
When my fingers are straightened, this one stays.
And
bent.
that's what it looks like, your finger. And you're saying that's what happened on January 22nd, 2008, right?
Yes.
Now, one of the other things involving this particular finger, it seems to have had its run, if you will, of bad things happen to it, right?
This finger?
Yes, the left ring finger?
I don't know.
Well, you talked to Ryan Burns about it, didn't you?
Yes,
And you told him that that finger, the left ring finger, had been damaged, right? Injured, didn't you?
I don't know if it was the left.
You don't remember telling him it was the left ring finger?
No,
Do you have a problem with memory?
occasionally.
And so,
Oh, there's a few moments like that in this cross-examination.
some of the things that you've told us, for example, then about other things in the past, you may have also had problems with your memory then, right?
Yes,
And so whatever you told us in the past is somewhat suspect then because your memory may be lacking.
Objection, argumentative.
I only told things I remember clearly that are crystallized in my mind.
With regard to Mr. Burns, you do remember who he was, right?
Yes,
And you do remember that you went over to West Jordan to meet him, right?
yes,
And you do remember that you did meet him that Thursday, and it was sometime around 11 o'clock in the morning, right?
I think so, yes.
And when you met him, you guys decided to go somewhere to a restaurant for some sort of business meeting, right?
Yes,
And during that time, didn't you have a bandage on your finger?
yes,
And it was your left finger, wasn't it?
no,
It was your right finger then, right? Is that what you're saying? It was your right finger?
it was two right fingers.
So it was your right finger then, right? Ma'am, are you sure that it was your right finger?
It was
Pardon?
two right fingers.
Do you remember then that you had a conversation with Detective Flores about this issue involving the finger?
Yes,
And do you remember that that was on July 16th of 2008?
yes,
And do you remember that you told him that on June 4th, you had been over at Mr. Alexander's home, right?
yes,
And you told him that you were over at Mr. Alexander's home and that some guy and some girl had come in, right?
yes,
And during whatever happened on June 4th, you told Detective Flores that it was your left finger that had been damaged. Do you remember that?
yes,
So you did tell that to the detective that it happened on June 4th, right?
yes.
Does that then refresh your recollection, and we'll play it so that we know what we're talking about?
You said you were fighting with her.
Yeah.
What happened to you?
She cut me.
Where?
My hand.
Let me see. Where?
You
you
actually
show
can't
me?
see it. If you look at my finger isn't the same now. I was
Let me
really,
see. Where did it get cut?
it was conveniently, it was right on the crease.
Right there on the crease.
Can you see? Well, it's kind of a purple color, I
This
guess.
one here,
It's
right
compared to
there.
this.
Yeah, right on the crease.
Oh, there's a vein on this one, maybe. I don't know.
Is this one here? So a slice there.
Yeah.
Just a small one? Or was it pretty deep?
I don't know how deep it was, but my finger hurt for a while.
Okay, so like right in that crease that you, right, across both of them?
Not my middle finger. It cut this one a little, but not as much. This is where it really went. I don't know how it happened that all these other fingers were missed, but this one, I don't know. This one, like I still can't close this finger all the way. It's as close as it goes. Whereas this one goes like that. Also, my CTR ring used to fit both fingers, and I can't get it on this finger anymore.
So that cut pretty deep then.
I guess if you feel it, squeeze it. It just feels like bone, like there's nothing abnormal there.
Mhm.
But again, like my CTR ring slides right on this finger, and it used to slide right in off this finger, and I just can't fit a ring on here.
Okay.
It's a bigger size now.
What about this here? What's that from?
That's my cat.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure she scratches me a lot.
That tape or that videotape, right?
Yes,
And that's you having the conversation discussing the left ring finger, right?
yes,
And you demonstrated to Detective Flores that left ring finger, right?
yes,
And you told him that this woman during this attack on June 4th of 2008 cut you right there, didn't you?
yes,
And you showed him, and the finger, if we look at it there, had the same aspect or had the same angle to it that your finger does now, doesn't it?
yes,
Ma'am, the injury to your finger happened on June 4th, 2008, not January 22nd of 2008, did it?
That's not correct.
Ma'am, with regard to the story involving this particular issue, you told us that it happened on January 22nd of 2008, right?
Which issue?
The left ring finger.
Yes.
You then discussed it, or there was this issue with Ryan Burns, right?
Which issue?
The cut finger.
The cut finger, yes.
And
2
then
cut fingers.
on July 16th of 2008, you discussed it with Detective Flores, right?
Yes.
One of the things that you told Mr. Burns was that you cut it at Margaritaville while you were working there, right?
No, I did not say
You never
Margaritaville.
told him that then, right?
I said at work.
So you never told him Margaritaville then, right?
No, he said that.
Right, but you never told him that you cut it at Margaritaville, right?
No.
You told him that you cut it at work then, right?
Yes.
And then when you spoke to Detective Flores, you gave him a different story. You didn't say that it was cut at work. You told him that it was cut some other way, right?
Yes.
And then you testified about it in this court, right?
Yes.
And you gave us another story of how this happened, right?
No.
Well, do you remember that you testified that you were at Mr. Alexander's home on June 4th, 2008 at the sink? Do you remember telling us that?
Yes.
And do you remember telling us that you dropped the glass in Mr. Alexander's house?
June 4th,
Whatever date you were there at Mr. Alexander's house.
I broke more than one glass at his house.
Ma'am, do you remember testifying yesterday about how you suffered this injury to your finger? Yes or no?
Not this finger.
No? Do you remember testifying that involving your finger, your left ring finger, yesterday, as a matter of fact, that was cut when you dropped the glass when you were at Mr. Alexander's house on the day that you killed him?
I did not indicate my left finger. I said my
Oh, so
finger.
you were saying it was your right finger that you cut in Mr. Alexander's house, right?
It was my right finger, yes.
So throughout this whole thing, Mr. Burns, when he indicated what finger it was, he was mistaken. Well, not he was mistaken. You're saying you never told Mr. Burns that it was the right finger that you cut, right?
We didn't discuss which hand.
Okay, so you never indicated to him in any way, shape, or form that it was the right finger.
Sustained.
And this issue of the 22nd of January 22nd, when you injured, when you say that you were injured, you kept the journal, didn't you? You kept the journal, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
And you didn't write in it all the time, but you wrote in it some of the time, right?
Frequently, yes.
Frequently. And you were writing about what was going on in your life back in January of 2008, right?
Yes.
And you would write about things that were significant.
Some things.
Right. And in fact, with regard to this particular journal, you knew that you could almost write anything that you wanted in it because it was going to stay private, right?
No.
Well, ma'am, let me show you, or let me mark one of them as an exhibit. You recognize it?
Yes, I do.
And that's your journal, right?
Sure is.
Okay, that's okay. Take a look at the entry, and just read it to yourself, on Sunday, August 26th of 07.
The whole entry?
Just read the first 5 lines. 6 lines.
Yes.
You wrote that, right?
Yes.
Take a look at exhibit number 455. Is this a true and accurate copy of those 5 or 6 lines?
Yes.
And you wrote that back on August 26th of 07, right?
Yes.
Look at the admission exhibit number.
455 is admitted.
Take a look at August 26th of 07. you're done reading it. let me
Just
know.
this one entry.
Yes, just that one entry of August 26th of 07.
Okay.
I know you have 2 entries, but the first entry is the one we're talking about.
Yeah, it looks like I have 3 on that day.
So have you read the first entry that involves this particular snippet?
Yes.
This journal and your journals were meant to be private, right?
Yes.
And that's what it says there. Well, I guess it's a good thing that nobody else reads this, because I write right now that I love Travis Victor Alexander so completely that I don't know any other way to be, correct? That's what it says.
Yes.
Do you remember when we started talking this morning that we talked about an incident where you went over to his house?
Yes.
And this was the incident that you referenced involving the killing, right? That it went through your head, right?
You talking about the incident in August 2007?
Right, exactly.
Yes.
And that incident in August of 2007, where you went over and peeked inside of his house, happened before this entry here of Sunday, August 26th of 07, right?
Pete.
What was the last thing you said?
He said, by saying Pete.
Restate your question.
When you looked inside the house.
Yes, it did happen before this entry.
Right, and so really the reason why you confronted Mr. Alexander was not because he owed you an explanation or anything like that. The reason you confronted him back in August of 2007 was because you were in love with him and you didn't want to let him go, right?
Objection, argumentative.
Overruled.
That's not right. But I was in love with him.
Yes, you did write this, though, didn't you?
Yes.
Now, you kept more than one journal, you kept a number of them, right?
I kept one journal at a time.
Okay. Let's take a look at another journal.
You just know that Jodie is the sort of person that kept hundreds of journals. She'd be writing her special thoughts every single day.
You recognize it, right?
Yes.
Why don't you open it up and look through it? 2.002. That's your writing in throughout that whole journal, right?
Yes.
There is an entry for Thursday, January 24th, 2008, right?
Yes.
Let's just take a look at it. See that?
Yes.
Let me mark another exhibit for you. Take a look at exhibit 456. The exhibit that you have in front of you, that's the whole entry for January 24th of 2008, correct?
I guess not as many people as myself are as interested in revisiting Jodie Arias. It's very quiet. I guess it's a Saturday.
I believe it is for the single one, yes.
There are other entries, but that's the complete entry for that one.
Yes.
Right? Because it's written in blue ink, right?
Yes.
And the other ones are written in black ink, right?
Yes, the one following.
This is where it all started for me in terms of true crime. This case, Jodie Arias. So I thought it'd be fun to go back and watch it again with a fresh mind, just to kind of dive deep into it. A marathon, as I said.
We move to the admission of exhibit number 456. And we can take a look at this exhibit number 242002. We talked about the entry of January 24th of 2008. Take a look at this journal. And isn't it true that the previous, in terms of chronological time, that the previous entry is on January 20th of 2008?
Yes.
So there's a gap of 4 days between the time you wrote on January 20th and on January 24th of 2008, right?
Yes.
Nothing in between, correct?
Not in the journal.
I'm asking about the journal, ma'am.
That's
Is there
correct.
anything else in front of you?
Ask and answer, Your Honor, an argumentative.
Stay.
In the journal, ma'am, there are no other entries between January 20th of 2008 and January 24th of 2008, right?
Yes.
If we then take a look at Exhibit 456, let's see what you wrote on Thursday, January 24th of 2008. You wrote, I haven't written because there has been nothing noteworthy to report, correct?
Yes.
Didn't you tell us, involving the finger, that this injury to your left finger, when Mr. Alexander went to kick you, that happened on January 22nd of 2008?
Yes, it did.
And yet you write here that nothing noteworthy has happened, right?
Yes.
And then you also write that you turned down 4 offers for a date on Friday night, right?
Yes.
You were free to date, and so was he, right?
Yes.
And then you finish it out by talking about going up to the snow, right? See that?
Yes.
You're going to go up there skiing, you crossed it out, and you just are going to go up to the snow, right?
Yes.
Did you go skiing?
No, I don't ski.
Pardon?
I don't ski. No, I didn't go.
All right. The entry of January 20th of 2008, take a look at exhibit number 242.002. Count the pages, please.
The pages between the two?
No, just your entry of Sunday, January 20th of 2008. Do you want me to show you where it is?
I have it. It's 4 and a few lines.
And it starts on the lower left-hand corner with 3 lines if you count the date, indicating January 20th of 2008, right?
Yes. I'm sorry, I misspoke. It's 5 pages and a few lines.
And in it, one of the things that you talk about is this issue involving Lonnie's baptism, right?
I haven't read it. Can I read it?
Sure, go ahead.
I moved away from Lonnie, so if you want me to finish it, if you're going to ask me about the rest of the entry, I can read the
I'm
rest.
asking you about reading the whole entry of Sunday, June 20th,
Okay.
2008. Go
Okay.
ahead and finish it.
Yes.
It does talk about Lonnie's baptism, right?
Yes.
And previously, when you testified, you indicated that the reason you missed Lonnie's baptism is because you and Mr. Alexander were involved in a sexual liaison, right?
Yes.
And this was a sexual liaison where the Pop Rocks and the Tootsie Pops were involved, right? That's what you said, right?
I'd have to reference dates.
Well, why don't I show you a copy of the transcript then and see if that refreshes your recollection as to what you told us on February 12th.
I would appreciate that.
All right, I will, starting on page 5. Wow, read that.
Would you like me to read it out loud? Just the highlighted portion?
Nope, just keep reading it.
Okay. Starting at the bottom, right?
Right. Have you read the entire transcript that deals with the sexual encounter involving the Pop Rocks and Tootsie Pops?
Yes, I started where you highlighted and
Well,
finished it.
Read it above it. Does that have anything to do with the Tootsie Pops or the Rock Pops?
Okay.
Does the upper portion have anything to do with it? Or not?
Yes.
Why don't you read the previous page just to make sure that we covered everything involving that particular encounter?
There's nothing about the pop rocks on this page.
There is nothing before that, correct?
Yes.
Wake up, Normie. Wake up. You're in court.
Read the entire transcript. I don't believe she has at this point.
Read the entire transcript.
I think that's the exact transcript.
Irrespective of the date that we're talking about, whether it was January 20th or January 21st or January 22nd, you do reference the Pop Rocks and Tootsie Pops sexual incident by reference to Lonnie's baptism, right? The journal entry of January 20th of 2008 also references Lonnie's baptism, doesn't it? Take a look at
Yes.
Exhibit 458. This is 458.
Yes.
And that's a true and accurate copy in front of you, the excerpt of what's in your journal involving Lonnie's baptism and the sexual encounter, isn't it?
Yeah, let me make sure I'm just referring to the same day in my journal.
Well, let's take a look at it. Let me have that. The first entry is identical on the first page. That indicates Sunday, January 20th, 2008, correct?
Yes, that's when I wrote the entry.
Okay. Then, as we continue on, there is the entry involving the baptism, right?
Hey Nancy, how are you? I'm dying on my feet here. I don't think as many people are as interested in revisiting Jodie Arias as I am. But it's good to see you. Hope you're well.
Do you see that? That entry is there involving Lonnie's baptism.
Yes, I just don't know if I'm referencing the 20th on that part of the entry.
Ma'am, is there any other intervening date between the January 20th of 2008 where we started and the very end where you put JA? Is there any other date in it?
That I did.
Yes or no?
There might be, I haven't.
Well, why don't you take a look? Let's take a look at the first page. First page starts Sunday, January 20th, 2008, doesn't it?
When I wrote it, yes.
Does it start out saying Sunday, January 20th, 2008, yes or no?
Yes.
And isn't it true that it starts out in black ink, right?
Yes.
And then it continues on in blue ink, right?
Yes.
And it flows, doesn't it? It says words flow from what's at the bottom there to the next page, don't they?
Yes.
So then when we go to the bottom of it, the next page is also in blue ink, right?
Yes.
In the next page, there is no other date reference, is there?
Objection, she needs to review it before she can answer the
She's looking
question.
at it.
Overruled. Maybe.
Thank you.
No, ma'am. Don't turn the page. I just want you to look at that next page to see if you see a date.
Objection, Your Honor, she needs to review it.
Oh, that's not the question. Overruled.
I didn't write a date.
No, there is no date on there, is there?
No.
Okay, let's turn the page. And that page is also in blue ink, right?
Yes.
And there is no date on that next page, is there?
That's correct.
Then let's look at the page following that. That page, where you have your left hand on, that's also in blue ink. No, you turn the page, go back. That's also in blue ink, correct?
Yes.
And there is no date on there either, is there?
That's correct.
Let's turn the page. And then on the next page, that's also in blue ink, correct?
Yes.
And there's no date on that either, right?
That is correct.
Yeah, very, very sad. Be careful who you let into your world to love you. Best advice anyone could ever get. And let me ask, Nancy, do you feel any sympathy for Jodie despite the horrendous act that she committed? Because to me, I think she was genuinely being ripped to pieces mentally by Travis.
The next page after that contains the initials JA, right?
Yes.
That's for Jodie Arias, correct?
Yes.
And that's also in blue ink, correct?
Yes.
And there's no date in that one, is there?
There is not.
And if you turn the page, go ahead. There's an entry for January 24th of 2008, right?
Yes.
We can then go back, turn the page once. We're looking at the entry that says JA on it, right?
Yes.
We go to the previous page, the one that you're pointing to. It does start, if I may have it back, with a word that's in quotations, right?
Yes.
Exhibit number 458 includes that particular portion of the entry in quotations, right?
Yes.
Then if we go to the previous page, at the bottom of the page, it's also in blue ink, right?
Yes.
The entry that I'm showing you now includes that last paragraph, right?
Second to last.
Second to last paragraph. Well, if you take a look at the bottom, you see that there's a word
Oh, I
that's,
apologize. You're correct.
okay? So in essence, what we're talking about is that the one with the word that's crossed out then travels on to the next page, and that's what's included in this entry, correct? In Exhibit 458, right?
Yes.
Along with the first page that includes the date, right?
Yes.
And the entry, or Exhibit 458, references Lonnie's baptism, right?
Yes.
Move for the admission of Exhibit 458.
All right, you need some additional time. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to take the noon recess at this time. Please be back in the jury room at 1:25. Remember the admonition. Have a nice lunch. You are excused.
All rise.
All righty. Okay. So I'm going to leave it there. And I shall try and soldier on with this. I will probably come live again tomorrow night and see if we can get a little bit more interaction in the chat. Nancy says, yes, I don't think this behavior justifies his murder. I think she tried everything she could to reel him into a relationship. She wasn't always honest about who she was. Yeah, yeah, I agree with all that. No behavior justifies murder, really, you know? I just, as I was saying earlier, I think it was just a tragic circumstance where all the stars just aligned in the wrong way, and that's what made her capable of such an act. It's kind of like Chris Watts. I don't think either of them would ever have been dangerous or have been capable of doing what they did if it wasn't for the unique circumstances that they were both in. But as I say, I shall soldier on, and there's another 2 parts to that cross-examination, and there's a whole host of other cross-examinations coming up, and then you've got Violet Lafayette as well, who goes on the stand, and that's a really interesting cross-examination. She was like a chameleon, changing herself so that he would like her, even so far as becoming a Mormon. Yeah, I mentioned that earlier. It's kind of crazy what people will do, how far they will go, you know, when they're infatuated with someone. He did mislead her at times, and I don't think he should have done that. Yeah, I think it went a bit further than that. I think it was a little bit of kind of mental and emotional torture. However, she did have a mental disability, and I think her disorder interfered with her having a normal relationship. Anyone else would have walked away. She definitely had something wrong mentally. Absolutely. She wasn't capable of walking away. It's the most disturbing thing about it is the fact that she planned this for days. You know, that level of premeditation. I mean, it's understandable to some degree, I guess, when there's a horrible situation occurs between um, husband and wife or boyfriend, girlfriend. It just gets completely out of hand, and it's an act that comes from passion. The fountain is passion and an inability to contain anger. But this is such prolonged passion and anger and hate and hurt. All right, so I'm going to leave it there. Thanks, Nancy, for your comments there. And as I say, I'm going to come on again tomorrow night, and hopefully we'll get a little bit more interaction. Yes, absolutely. All the events and each one's individual feelings and where they were at in life came into play to bring all this together to a crescendo. Absolutely. Yeah, I think it was just, it's going to happen, you know. The odds are that in certain circumstances, certain relationships, they're just going to end up where everything just goes wrong. And like you say, it comes to a crescendo. And one of the two just happens to have a certain mental problem that makes them capable of acting out what would normally just be an impulse, no more than a fleeting thought. All right, well, enjoy the weekend, everyone. Enjoy your Saturday evening, afternoon, morning, wherever you are, and hopefully see some of you tomorrow night. Take care.